Good day, everyone. My name is Micah, and welcome to Group 5's presentation about Westen's review of psychoanalytic theory. For the introduction, it tackles about Frederick Freud's criticisms on both Freud and psychoanalysis. One of his criticisms was about psychoanalysis has proved to be an indifferently successful and vastly inefficient method of removing neurotic symptoms, and that psychodynamic treatments produce more converts than cures. However, there are also counter-arguments about this. They said that critics reflect a lack of knowledge of current psychological research relevant to their conclusions. A substantial body of evidence now supports several of his propositions, particularly the existence of unconscious thoughts, feelings, and motives. The article reviews research on unconscious thought and memory, unconscious effect, and unconscious motivation, concluding that the most fundamental assumption of psychoanalytic theory and practice is no longer a matter of scientific debate. For the outline for the flow of our discussion, it tackles about the different topics. First will be the evidence for unconscious cognitive processes, second will be the evidence for unconscious affective processes, and lastly will be unconscious motivation.
For the evidence for unconscious cognitive processes, I will be talking about the different kinds of memories and its implications for the psychoanalytic understanding of unconscious processes. 15 years ago, cognitive scientists paid little attention to the concept of consciousness. It was basically assumed that the most important cognitive processes were conscious. Memory back then was seen as the process of bringing thoughts into consciousness, and thought was seen as a process of consciously manipulating ideas and images to solve problems and make decisions. A standard model that was used for 3 decades was called the modal model. This states that memory was described as a multi-stage process involving series of memory stores. First memory store is the initial sensory registration or memory that lasts a flash of an instant. Next is the short-term memory or a roughly 30-second 7-item memory stored under conscious control, which is used for such purposes as dialing a phone. Next is the long-term memory or memory that can last a lifetime. In the case of implicit and explicit memory, there is a consensus among cognitive scientists that human thought and memory involve at least 2 systems. First system is the explicit memory, which involves conscious retrieval of information such as childhood memories or the name of a friend. Next is the implicit memory, which refers to memory that is observable in behavior but is not consciously brought to mind. Moving on to the kinds of memory, first we have the procedural memory. This is a kind of implicit memory, or the how-to knowledge of procedures or skills useful in various situations, for example, motor memory or behaviorally expressed knowledge of subtle social rules. This type of memory is much faster than conscious retrieval. People typically cannot report how they carry out these procedures because conscious reflection can disrupt these processes. Then we have the associative memory, or another kind of implicit memory that is relevant to psychoanalysis. This pertains to the formation of associations that guide mental processes and behavior outside of consciousness. Priming experiments are used to study this type of memory. Why? Because the assumption behind these experiments is that priming can reveal the latent structure of associative networks by examining the impact of the prime on memory or judgment regarding semantically related words. The prime in this case is often presented surreptitiously, subliminally, or supraliminally. Now, what are the implications for the psychoanalytic understanding of unconscious processes? Research on unconscious thought and memory is of particular relevance to the system preconscious rather than the dynamic unconscious. Substantial clarifications and amendments to Freud's mode were suggested. First suggestion is that the concept of the preconscious fails to distinguish 3 very different phenomena that should be denoted by different names. First is the procedural knowledge, then the descriptively unconscious thoughts that are currently at high level of activation, and the descriptively unconscious thoughts that exist as potentialities in memory but are not currently active. The second amendment is that recognition of the importance of activated unconscious networks of association was given. And the third is that the data on unconscious cognitive processes suggests that Freud's initial postulation of 2 systems, the preconscious and unconscious, characterized by 2 different kinds of thoughts, secondary and primary, is problematic. A more parsimonious model than Freud's 2 systems model of memory would suggest that memory is organized along networks of association, some parts of which can become conscious and some parts of which are likely to remain unconscious, even when highly activated because their content is threatening and would elicit too much unpleasant effect.
Next, for the evidence for unconscious affective processes, it has been discovered that affective processes can also be unconscious. People tend to protect themselves from unpleasant, painful feelings through unconscious defenses. So people can learn to unintentionally associate aspects of situations or other people with pleasant or unpleasant experiences. Thus, they respond unconsciously by avoiding situations similar to the past threatening or unpleasant experiences. So affective processing occurs outside of awareness regardless if the person is responding defensively or not. Violent also mentioned some defensive processes. One is reality distorting defenses such as gross denial. The other one is neurotic defenses such as repression. The other one is mature defenses such as sublimation or the use of humor. Again, defensive processes are to protect people from unpleasant emotional states by avoiding triggering thoughts or memories. In the next slide, we can see some examples of defensive processes. First is the unconscious sexual arousal. Homophobia is a defense against threatening some homosexual feelings. Next is repression. It is the tendency to forget traumatic events. It is also defensive memory reconstruction. And evidence for this defense mechanism is a woman who experienced sexual molestation during their childhood who tend to forget those events. The next one is narcissism and self-enhancement. It is the viewing of oneself as above average on positive characteristics. For example, physical attractiveness and intelligence. The next one is the defense against unpleasant emotions and its physiological correlates. First is the avoidant attachment styles. It is being defensive about feelings in close relationships. They dismiss the importance of attachments or give idealized generalizations about the relationships but fail to give examples. Illusory mental health. People become unaware or denial of their own distress. The next one is repressive coping style. It is again the tendency to avoid feeling emotions or avoiding managing distress. So relating it to physiology, these defensive styles are related to cholesterol levels, asthma, vulnerability to cancer, and low immune system.
These studies not just probe on the unconscious affective processes, but also reveal the existence of dynamically unconscious processes. According to Pennebecker, it is helpful to acknowledge and discuss painful experiences, which is also now known as venting, since it helps increase our immune functioning, physical health, and adaptive behavior. Expressing these negative emotions may lead to a temporary increase in arousal, but it's good because it then leads to a decrease in arousal in the long run. Meanwhile, repression of feelings may maintain arousal continuously. These evidences then lead to these four conclusions that may have potential treatment implications. Number 1, affective processes can and likely to occur in our daily lives without us realizing it. And the solution against unconsciously threatening thoughts and feelings would be to bring awareness to them. Number 2, these can happen even without defensiveness on our part. 3, for trauma, it is necessary that we acknowledge and discuss it, but it's also very important that we work on our automatic responses, our involuntary behaviors and impulses in response to the trauma. And lastly, we can be unconsciously conditioned to have these affective associations. Psychoanalytic techniques from Freud may help treat this. But also, in order to truly change the unconscious affective associations, the person has to be able to associate a representation with different emotions. This does not only apply to phobias but also to many more things such as childhood trauma or issues.
Let's talk about unconscious motivation. Unconscious motivation refers to the hidden and underlying reasons behind our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we are not consciously aware of. It involves mental processes and emotions that can significantly influence our behavior and decision making. According to psychoanalytic theory, unconscious motivation is rooted in early childhood experiences and conflicts, shaping an individual's personality and behavior as they develop. It is believed that these early experiences can create unconscious desires, fears, and conflicts that influence our thoughts and actions in adulthood. Unconscious motivation can also be influenced by cultural and societal factors. For example, social norms and expectations can create unconscious biases and preferences that affect our decision making without us being aware of it. Furthermore, unconscious motivation can be inferred from patterns of behavior, emotion, and cognition, as well as through techniques such as priming and implicit association tests. There were studies where unconscious motivation was demonstrated. According to Barg, motives become automatized through repeated use and are often better drivers of action compared to conscious rational analysis in some situations. For example, priming subjects with words related to achievements could effectively activate motives in most cases. Another demonstration of unconscious motivation is Wilson's study, where it was observed that people's gut level feelings might often serve as more effective guides to action than finding reason behind their choices. Aside from these, Lewicki observed the unconscious transference process. In his study, subjects avoided a person whose physical appearance resembled an experimenter with whom they had a single, brief, unfriendly encounter. In addition, Anderson and colleagues' study also observed that unconscious feelings can be redirected from one person to another and inspire behavior toward the second person. When traits from a significant other are associated with a fictional character, people tend to attribute other characteristics of their significant other to the character. They also feel motivated to either meet or avoid the character based on the original feelings toward their significant other.
For the conclusion, Westen reviews studies that provide evidence for the existence and importance of unconscious processes in mental life, such as perception, decision making, emotion, and motivation. The unconscious is adaptive. The idea that the unconscious mind serves adaptive functions has gained traction among researchers. For example, people can make accurate judgment without conscious awareness, and unconscious emotions can guide behavior in adaptive directions. The role of unconscious processing in perception is important, as shown by research on subliminal perception, blind sight, and unconscious interference. It is also important in processing of memory, as shown by research on implicit memory and the role of unconscious processes in forgetting. Also in decision making, as shown by research on intuition and influence of unconscious factors on decision making. It is also important, lastly, on social cognition, as shown by research on implicit attitudes and implicit stereotypes and the influence of unconscious biases on social behavior. The studies reviewed in this article suggests that Freud was right in his central hypothesis that much of mental life, including thought, feeling, and emotion, is unconscious. However, we should not speak of the unconscious as a unified and isolated sector of the mind. Instead, we should recognize that there are many different types of unconscious processes, each serving different functions. That is all for the presentation of Group 5. Thank you for listening.